In this video, we're going to compare everything between the brand new 15-inch Surface Laptop 7 and the 15-inch M3 MacBook Air. We're going to look at everything, including the design, the keyboard, the screen, the ports, the performance, and more. So buckle up because we're just going to start. And starting us off, we're going to talk about the specs and the pricing. The Surface Laptop 15-inch has a 12-core Snapdragon X Elite processor. That's the 80-100 processor at 4 gigahertz. That is the middle line of the Elite line of processors. It has an Adreno GPU, a 6-core NPU with up to 45 trillion operations per second. It has 16 gigabytes of memory in this model with 512 gigabytes of storage, and the cost is $14.99, although you can actually save $50 on this right now from Microsoft. The 15-inch MacBook Air actually has a display of 15.3 inches. It comes with the 8-core M3 processor at 4.05 gigahertz. It has a 10-core GPU and a 16-core neural engine at 18 TOPS, or 18 trillion operations per second, which is quite a bit fewer than the 45 trillion operations per second on the Surface. This MacBook Air is also spec'd at 16 gigabytes of memory and 512 gigabytes of storage, and comes in at $16.99, or $200 more than the regular retail price of the Surface. With the new Snapdragon ARM processor in the Surface Laptop, and the other specs being the same, this is going to be a pretty good apples-to-apples comparison. And next up, we can talk about the design of these two laptops. Both of these laptops actually look really good. I love the design of both of these. The MacBook Air, of course, has the new refreshed Apple design language that Apple's been moving to over the last couple of years, which is just flat top and bottoms and, rounded edges. This is probably the cleanest looking laptop you're going to find. It is symmetrical in most ways. It can be symmetrical, and it's thin and light and feels pretty good. The Surface Laptop 7 also looks really good, and I actually love this design. It actually, funny enough, still follows Apple's old MacBook Air wedge design that we've seen for, since 2009? So when placed side by side, the MacBook Air is actually only as thick as the thickest part of the Surface Laptop without the display, and just barely thicker than the Surface Laptop at the thin edge. The MacBook Air is also just a little bit wider and taller than the Surface due to its slightly larger display size. And when it comes to the black color of the Surface Laptop 7, it is just slightly darker than the space black of this iPad Pro. And although it seems to be doing a pretty good job with fingerprints so far, I can see them starting to build up around the casing. Microsoft decided to go with a more angular bottom edge to this laptop. I really like the design of this. There's something about it. It's just neat and clean and kind of cool looking. It's got a little bit more character than just the flatness of the MacBook Air. I do have to point out one annoyance with the Surface Laptop, and that is that there's basically no lip or anything to grab onto on the lid to actually open up the laptop. With the MacBook Air, there's the perfect little thumb cutout to get your thumb in there and start lifting up the display. But with the Surface Laptop, there's this smallest little ledge that you have to try and grab, and it's pretty difficult to do most of the time. Usually I find myself needing to put one hand on the back side of it and then my thumb on the front to give it a little bit of pressure to be able to open it up. Otherwise, it just kind of slides, or it can slide around as you try and lift up the display. When you open up both these laptops, what you're going to find is a sleek and modern design on both of them. Both of them look incredibly modern and stylish. The keyboards look basically the same, and the trackpads, of course, there's a big difference there, but we'll go ahead and talk about that in just a couple of minutes. And when we move to the displays, both of the displays have sleek bezels on both sides. Of course, they're not the thinnest bezels I've ever seen, but the bezels on the MacBook wrap around the same width until you get to the notch, but the bezel on the top of the Surface Laptop is a little bit thicker than it is on the sides because, they're leaving lots of space for the cameras. On the right side of the Surface Laptop, we do get the Surface power and dock connector along with a micro SD card slot. On the MacBook Air, we have a headphone jack. And on the left-hand side of the Surface Laptop, we do have a headphone jack, a USB-A port, and 2 USB 4 USB-C ports. On the MacBook Air, we do have the MagSafe power connection and 2 Thunderbolt 3/USB 4 USB-C ports. And if you're wondering what the heck the difference is between the USB 4 ports on the Surface Laptop and the Thunderbolt/USB 4 ports on the MacBook, it doesn't really matter. That's a topic for a whole nother video. But the gist of it is that both of these laptops will work just fine with fast external SSD storage and docks and connecting displays and most things that you want to connect to a laptop. For example, the TS4 from channel partner CalDigit. If you know my channel, you know that I love the CalDigit TS4. It is my primary dock for my Mac, and I use it every day. This dock has so many ports and features, but did you know that the TS4 can act as a powerful charging hub even when you aren't connected to your computer? Many of the ports on the TS4 are fully available for connecting USB-powered devices or charging up your gear. On the front, you can charge at up to 20 watts with the left USB-C port, which is great for phones and tablets. And the other two ports can charge at 7.5 watts for phones, smartwatches, and other gear. On the back, you have two more USB-A ports for offline charging at 7.5 watts, two Thunderbolt/USB-C ports for charging at up to 15 watts, and the host port can charge anything at up to 98 watts. And if you would prefer something not be charged when you disconnect your computer from the TS4, these two USB ports without the battery icon will stop supplying power when you disconnect your computer from the TS4. The TS4 is a super versatile dock and a powerful charging hub, so check out the TS4 today using the links below, and my thanks to CalDigit for sponsoring this video. On the inside, I want to talk about the keyboards real quick. I am so used to the Apple Magic Keyboards. I use them all the time, whether it's on the laptops, the desktop Magic Keyboard, the iPad Magic Keyboard. They all just feel the same. So when I move from device to device, there is no learning curve. Moving over to the Surface laptop, the keys are very similar, but they're just not quite the same. I feel like they're a little bit more squishy than on the MacBook Air. Maybe there's a slight bit more travel that I'm not used to, but they are quieter than what I find on the MacBook Air. For the most part, I haven't had an issue going back and forth between the Mac and the Surface, but I do find that I am missing a couple of keystrokes here and there, so I have to delete maybe just a little bit more than I do on the Mac. Both of the keyboards are, of course, backlit, but the Surface does actually have a dedicated key to changing the keyboard brightness, which can come in handy versus trying to make sure you put it in Control Center on the Mac and then remembering where it is. When it comes to trackpad, Surface Laptop finally has caught up to the MacBook Air trackpad. Now it is a haptic trackpad, which means you can actually tap anywhere you want. You don't have to tap just at the bottom because of the old diving board style trackpads, which I absolutely loathe. I hate those trackpads so much. That is the worst part about switching from a Mac to a PC every time I do it. Just like with the MacBook Air, you have the option to change the trackpad sensitivity, so you can make it require a slightly harder or a slightly less hard push on the trackpad. I prefer the lightest setting possible because I can just fly through and easily click on stuff. So the biggest difference, of course, is the size of the trackpad. The 15-inch MacBook Air trackpad is way oversized. I think that this size is pretty good on the Surface Laptop 15-inch, but I do find that the 14-inch MacBook Pro has the best size trackpad, at least for me and my hands. I feel like the 15-inch MacBook Air is a little bit too big, so the keyboard's pushed further back on the deck, which can create pressure points on my wrists when I'm typing. The keyboard on the Surface Laptop is pushed back just about the same amount, but it's not taking advantage of any extra space. Now, I'm not saying I would want the 15-inch MacBook Air trackpad size on the Surface Laptop, but a little bit bigger would be nice. But regardless, there's plenty of room for 2, 3, and 4 finger swipes and gestures. So overall, the trackpad has been pretty good on the Surface Laptop, almost as good as the MacBook Air, but I have found just a couple of small issues. The inertial scrolling on the Surface Laptop has been inconsistent for me. Sometimes it works, sometimes it jitters and stutters and doesn't go as far as I expect it to go. The trackpad on the MacBook Air, of course, the inertial scrolling is just good. It has been working like this for many, many years without issue. Another small issue I've had with the trackpad on the Surface Laptop is sometimes I'll go in and I'll try and align the cursor in a specific spot, and the cursor will move over just a couple of characters on its own, as if it's incorrectly sensing my finger moving. It happens enough to notice, not enough to really hurt my overall experience with this laptop, but it is something I have noticed, and maybe there'll be a quick update coming for it in the future. And now we get to talk about the displays. On the Surface Laptop, we do have a 15-inch LED IPS panel. It is 201 pixels per inch at a 3:2 aspect ratio. The Surface Laptop comes with a 120 Hz dynamic refresh display, similar to what you'll find on the MacBook Pro. It has a maximum brightness of 600 nits, and of course, it is a multi-touch display. The MacBook Air is a slightly larger 15.3-inch IPS display at 224 pixels per inch and a 16:10 aspect ratio. This display is the standard 60 Hz display that Apple uses on most of its devices, with a maximum brightness of 500 nits, and of course, it is not a touchscreen. The backlight on both of these displays has been really good. I haven't really found any issues with hot and cold spots with the backlight on either one of these. They both were very consistent across the board. And the same went for screen uniformity as well, showing different colors on both of these displays. As it cycled through them, you can see that the colors are pretty much consistent or flat across the entire display. Again, there isn't really any hot or cold spots that lead to weird color issues that you might see. When trying to watch HDR video content, which Microsoft says the Surface 7 actually supports, I actually found that the contrast on the MacBook Air was higher than what I saw on the Surface Laptop. You can tell that the Surface Laptop is actually brighter, but the contrast is just better on the MacBook Air. The Surface Laptop does have 2 different color modes, so I tried out sRGB as well and did not find any difference. If you're not comparing these displays side by side, both of these displays are really good for everyday work, for content, for just about anything you would need. I actually enjoy both of these, although I will point out that the reflectivity of the Surface Laptop is much higher than it is on the MacBook Air. Of course, looking at the front, the issue that some people will have will be the notch. And I promise you, if you've never used a MacBook with a notch, just like with an iPhone with a notch, as soon as you use it for a day or 2 or a week max, like the notch just disappears. It does not become an issue. But if it really is an issue for you, then you have the slightly larger top bezel of the Surface Laptop 7 and no notch. Now, unfortunately, there's no Face ID built into the notch of the MacBook Air. You still have to use Touch ID on the keyboard to do any kind of authentication to unlock your PC or pay for purchases. With the Microsoft Surface Laptop 7, you do have Windows Hello built in. So as soon as you open up the display, you are recognized and logged in. It is incredibly fast. It is basically the same speed to log into both computers, but one of those, you don't need to reach up and touch the keyboard. Now, I did want to mention support for external displays. The MacBook Air does support 2 external displays, but only when the lid is closed. The Surface Laptop 7 can support up to 3 external displays, plus its built-in internal display. But using it was not quite the easiest or best experience. All in all, it took about 15 minutes to actually get all the displays to work correctly with the Surface Laptop, but they did work. And after reboot and after putting to sleep and waking back up, they continued to work. So first generation bugs probably. But of course, 3 displays plus the internal is a lot more than you can get with the M3 MacBook Air. Moving on to the built-in cameras and microphones of these 2 devices, this is the Surface Laptop 7. Right away to my eye, the picture looks good, even though the white balance is definitely a bit off. Everything looks a little bit too warm. With the MacBook Air, the white balance is a little bit more accurate, but it's definitely a bit too sharp. The video is definitely pulling in some wrinkles. Both cameras have the option for a portrait light or studio light, so when I turn those on, here's with the portrait or studio light, and here it is off. So there's a slight difference with it, kind of changing the brightness of my face. Both cameras do have a portrait blur effect as well. So when we turn that on, you'll see that everything behind me has kind of got a little bit of a blur to it. You can see it has issues around my hair and that stand behind me. And you can see it over here as well. So I'd say both of them do about the same level of job trying to do that with AI or whatever they're using. And both of them just kind of suck a bit too. Now, the Surface does have a way to actually keep your eyes focused on the camera using AI, which is a bit kind of freaky. So right now I'm looking at the camera, but as I take my finger and move it to the right side of the screen, I'm now looking to the right, and my eyes are still kind of focused on the front of the camera. And when I move my finger to the left, same thing, or down to the bottom, same thing. It still looks like I'm looking at the camera. Very, very weird. When it comes to the speakers, the MacBook Air speakers are better. There's just no doubt that the speakers on the MacBook Air are better. They have a wider range. They have more bass. You actually hear all the different tones. The speakers on the Surface Laptop 7 are actually louder. They have a higher peak audio level, but it's almost distorted. It's very high. There's not much bass. The speakers just sound tinny and not really that good, but they are louder. Now, moving on to performance. When it comes to the Geekbench single-core score, the 15-inch MacBook Air with M3 got a score of 3139 compared to 2804 on the Surface Laptop, making the MacBook Air about 12% faster. But when we switch over to multi-core, you can see where the Surface Laptop can actually sprint ahead with a score of 13,893 compared to 11,996 on the MacBook Air, making the Surface Laptop about 16% faster in multi-core tests. And there is a direct relationship between that speed and the amount of cores, with the Surface Laptop having 12-core CPU and the M3 MacBook Air having an 8-core CPU, with only 4 of them being performance cores. With the Cinebench 2024 single-core results, you can see a similar story, with the MacBook Air being about 15% faster than the Surface Laptop. But with multi-core, the Surface Laptop is about 53% faster than the MacBook Air. That is a big difference, with 943 compared to 615. But with the 3D Mark Steel Nomad test, we can see that the MacBook Air was 78% faster than the Surface Laptop. Now, that's not to say that games won't be changed or optimized to run on the Adreno graphics on the Surface. It's just going to take a while for developers to get on board with the new ARM chips in the new Windows laptops. Plus, in a similar vein, there is the new translation layer inside of Windows, and that is the new Prism translation layer. Just like how Apple's Rosetta 2 translates Intel-based applications over to Apple Silicon to run in real time, Prism does something very similar. I figured the best way for me to test this is to run a game that is not optimized for either of these laptops. This is a truly Intel-based game, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and it does have a benchmarking tool built right in. As it turns out, Apple is doing a bit of a better job, getting an average of 61 frames per second compared to just 35 frames per second on the Surface laptop, making the MacBook Air about 74% faster, translating Shadow of the Tomb Raider over to the current platforms. When it comes to other applications that are not specifically optimized for the new hardware on the Surface, you're going to run into some compatibility issues, just like we did with the Apple Silicon transition starting with the M1. Some applications will work really well with the translation layer, and some won't work at all. It'll take time for apps to be updated or updates to Prism to make everything work a little bit better. There is a transition phase that you're going to have to expect. You're going to find lots of videos on YouTube talking about applications not working well on the new X Elite laptops, and that's okay. It's just to be expected. And some applications just may not run well on these laptops even when they are optimized. This laptop does not seem to be particularly tailored to things like graphic design and video editing. But then you're also going to find things like this Apple TV app, which is available on the Windows Store, but when I tap download to go bring up the Windows Store and get it, I can't install it. It says it's not compatible with my PC. So you're going to find, again, compatibility issues and things that just won't work right now. But give it some time. I think that this transition to ARM is going to be different than Microsoft's previous efforts. But for all the normal and office-type apps that I use on a regular daily basis, I've had zero performance issues, zero hiccups. Everything has worked very fast and been very stable. Now, I want to go back to performance and talk about fans real quick. There is fans built into the new Surface laptop, and there are, of course, no fans in the MacBook Air. And I have to say, I have been pleasantly surprised with the fans in this Surface Laptop 7. Basically, every other PC out there has fans that sound terrible. They're really loud. They have a terrible pitch to them. They hurt your ears. They're just awful. This one is the most MacBook sounding fan I have heard ever. The fan in the 15-inch Surface Laptop just does not get loud. And when it does start ramping up for performance reasons, it's not annoying. It's just a fan sound. It's just a whoosh of air. It really is just fine. Here's an example of the fan as I'm nearing the end of the Cinebench 2024 test. And you can hear that it just sounds okay, not annoying. Now, moving on to some smaller differences between these two laptops, I want to start with SSD speed. On the MacBook Air, we're getting around 3,300 megabytes per second. And on the Surface laptop, getting a maximum of around 3,600 megabytes per second. Both of those are incredibly fast for everyday and even most professional workloads, so the SSD on both of them are really good. As far as Wi-Fi capabilities, the MacBook Air has Wi-Fi 6E, and the new Surface Pro 7 has Wi-Fi 7 built in. Wi-Fi speeds can vary greatly depending on how far away you are from the AP or what's between you and the AP or other interferences. But as I ran through iPerf tests to check actual performance of my Wi-Fi speed, the MacBook Air consistently got better speeds on Wi-Fi 6E than the Surface Laptop 7, sometimes 400 or 500 megabits per second. When it comes to AI, I just want to mention a couple of things because there's a lot more to come as Apple and Microsoft roll out new updates over the next year. So we'll have to save that for a later time. But right now, Windows does ship with a brand new Copilot button to specifically bring up the Copilot chatbot on the Windows laptop. This is very similar to if you just download ChatGPT onto a MacBook or any other laptop. But now you have a dedicated key for it. You can ask it dedicated things like how to make a pizza, and it hopefully won't tell you to eat glue, or how to enable airplane mode, but it won't actually do anything for you. And here it actually got confused. It thinks I was talking about airplane mode on a mobile phone rather than on this laptop. You can also do image creation on this as well, where it reaches out to DALL-E to pull that information in. You do have a specific amount of credits that you can use, so I don't know what you do or how much it costs after that. There's also Image Creator built inside of Microsoft Paint. And again, you have a limited amount of tokens to actually use, and I don't know what the cost is after that. It says it's in preview mode, but you can just go ahead and type a prompt here and get a response like, well, it says right here, a cat walking in the woods. and give it a couple of seconds, and it's going to give you a few different options. All right, that took about 20 seconds. And now I have an AI-generated photo of a cat walking in the woods, if that's something you need. And the eye tracking thing I showed you earlier, where it basically kept my eyes focused on the camera, was AI as well. And the portrait mode on both of these laptops uses AI. But the flagship AI feature from Microsoft called Recall was recalled because it just had lots of privacy concerns. So that's going to ship sometime in the future. And so once that ships and once Apple ships their stuff, then maybe we can do a full comparison. Battery life on the new Snapdragon platform is supposed to be one of the biggest advantages along with performance. And Microsoft says that the 15-inch Surface laptop can get up to 22 hours of video playback, which doesn't really translate to any real-world use. For my test, I started at 100% and disconnected from the charger at around 7:30 a.m. and proceeded to do my regular everyday work for my day job. There's email and Teams messages and calls and web surfing and remote server administration with Citrix and taking notes and more web research and, of course, some YouTube. I installed some apps and found another one that just won't work right now. At the 2-hour mark, I was down to 83%, and as I was getting ready for lunch, I was down to 63%. And finally, at the end of the day, I was at just 31%, just doing my regular day job stuff. No video editing, no photo editing, just Office apps and web stuff. But I figured, hey, let's just go ahead and run one benchmark at the end of the day while we're at it, just to make it work a bit. When the Cinebench multi-core test completed, I was at 20%, and it actually gave us a pretty poor score on the recommended power setting. By comparison, Apple says that the 15-inch MacBook Air can get up to 18 hours of video playback or 15 hours of wireless web surfing. When I did my battery test on the Air, I did the same type of work and was able to complete 8 hours of work with about 56% of the battery remaining. If I spent more time on benchmarks and games, I can fully drain it in as little as 3.5 to 4 hours. It seems as though for regular office use, the 15-inch Surface should last a whole day. It did for me. And overall, battery life fully depends on how you use your machine and what apps you use. As more apps become native to the new platform, I would expect the battery life to get a bit better, but the MacBook right now is just the better battery buddy. So I think that is all the differences between the 15-inch MacBook Air with the M3 and the 15-inch Surface laptop with Snapdragon Elite. If the biggest concern for you is what OS you're running, I think that it's obvious you should choose the Surface if you need Windows, and apps will hopefully continue to get updated and supported. I really like both of these laptops, and I'm happy that Apple now has some real competition in the performance per watt category, and I'm excited to see what's next. But what did you think? Did the Surface perform better or worse than you expected compared to the MacBook? Is one of these a clear winner for you? Let me know in the comments down below. If you're interested in seeing my full review of the M3 Air, you can find that in the video right over here. And if you want to see the full review of this Surface laptop over here, hit the subscribe button so you can see it. Hit the thumbs up button if you liked it, and I'll see you next time.